Okay. Welcome, everybody. Hey, I'm Mike Schachter, president of the Carolina Nature Coalition. The Carolina Nature Coalition is a community organization based here in New Bern, North Carolina, whose mission is to raise public awareness of environmental issues and environmental justice issues by engaging citizens in meaningful community action. And I'm sure this presentation will meet our mission. By the way, today is Rainforest Awareness Day. Did you know that? So, and you know how important the rainforests are and how we're losing them. So, they're very important. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that our organization exists only by donations. We don't have any other way to get money. So if you like what we're doing, if you're here, there's a donation box, but you can also donate online at carolinanaturecoalition.org. We have a donation button, and some people actually use it. Our thanks to New Bern Now, New Bern Magazine, and Public Radio East, who have done publicity for us. So we appreciate that. And to our board members, Connie Casey, who provided the refreshments, and who is our, she does our, does our publicity and other things. I forgot what. Tom Shoup, who is our technical person and also our secretary. Cleopatra, a board member back there. Thank you. And Ed, who will be introducing our presenter, because Ed was instrumental in getting her here. So, Ed.
It was about, 25, 30 years ago, I was with the U.S. Forest Service in Green Mountain National Forest, and we were doing a study on Indiana bats because at that time we were really concerned about their well-being. They were endangered. Unfortunately now, even some of the most prevalent bats, like the little brown, are on the way out because of, what's the name? White nose syndrome. So there's been a drastic decline. But anyway, at the time, I had a phone call from somebody named Brenda Bhatti that was saying, "Oh, can I volunteer and work with you guys? I'm really interested. I'm at Antioch College doing my master's degree, and sure, if you want to stay up all night and look at bat nets and hoping you'll catch something besides a moth in them." And she was great. She came over and spent several times with us there, and then went on to a career in consulting for the last 25 years and doing a lot of work with bats. And it's great to have her here, and it's great that we're together again. So at that point, I will say, Brenda.
Because I know we've got the Zoom folks. So camera, nice to see you. I will be wandering around because I don't do well right behind a podium. I've got props and I will try to bring them in front of the camera if our operators out back can accommodate that. But with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started with a little slideshow that I've put together for everyone. And I said, I don't want to study chipmunks. I want to study something more interesting. So I'd go over to the engineering school, and all these fancy engineering students with their big backpacks at midnight walking in, trying to do their studies and impress their professors, would look at me as I was laying on the sidewalk, looking up at the huge steeple on their building with the lights, and I'm watching the bats circle. And I went back to my mentor, my advisor, and I said, "Can I study bats?" He said, "I don't know how to study bats." But from there, the budding interest started, and I couldn't stop. So I've been working in some way, shape, or form with bats since, and now I work in consulting, and you would be amazed at how often bats come up as a subject of interest on transportation projects, highways, bridges, wind projects. I do a lot on airports. And so even developments, people call because they're in their houses, their barns, bats are everywhere. So let's talk a little bit more about that. Worldwide, when I first started in this about 25 years ago, there were supposedly only 900 species of bats. As we've learned more over the years and people continue to look for bats, research bats, we go, oh my gosh, here's another one. Oh, look at this one over here. We never knew this one existed. And of course, we as scientists, we go back and forth. There are some lumpers. They want to put the bats together in one group. There are some splitters. They want to put the bats in more and more groups. So at the moment, we've agreed on, there's about 1,400 different species of bats worldwide. As you can see on the map, there are some hot spots. So if you look at North America where we are, it's a little bit blue. Where I am primarily located up in the Northeast, 8 or 9 species. Cold weather, harsh winters, the bats have adapted. Some of them hibernate, we'll talk about that. Some of them migrate, but down where the bats are, and you see the red, all the way from the southerly part of Latin America into the Amazon forests and northern portion of South America, 26, 30 species, because they don't have to worry about migrating, hibernating, conserving their stores. They've got plenty of food, they can be active all year long, and so they have evolved more and more species in those areas. If you're familiar in biology, we've got what's called a phylogenetic tree. Evolutionists and scientists who try to categorize animals into all these different groups, they go back and forth on where these branches actually go. So this is a very generalized phylogenetic tree, and I wanted to share this because a lot of people think bats are nothing but flying mice or flying rats. They're really not. So if you look at that, you've got platypuses at the bottom, one of the earliest in the evolutionary chain in the mammal class. And you work your way up. You've got kangaroos, elephants. You've got, I think those are aardvarks and or anteaters. And then you've got man, Homo sapiens. And you've got rabbits and mice on their own little bars there. And you notice the bats are on a different branch. They're not associated with mice or rats or rabbits at all. If you think about mice, rats, 2 or 3 years. And if you think about bats, does anybody want to guess how long bats tend to live? Way more than 2 or 3 years? 20, yeah, 25 in some cases. So these little animals, using various kinds of tactics, techniques that I'll describe more, are able to conserve and last a lot longer, 20, 25 years. So they're in the class Mammalia, order Chiroptera. So Chiroptera comes from the, I don't know, we'll say Latin, one of those Romance languages. It means hand wing. And if you think about a bat, you see its arm structure in the picture there. So we've got the forearm, and then that wing membrane, that patagium, is spread out over 4 main fingers and the thumb at the top. So 2 of those bones, 2 of the fingers are fused, and the other 2 long finger bones are spread out to keep that patagium, which is their flight surface. When they're flying, they're using their hand. And if you've ever seen a picture of somebody holding a bat up, wingtip to wingtip, they're holding those bats by their fingers. Not a good way, not a nice way to hold a bat. And then you look at the bottom down there and you see a little tiny hind foot. That's the one they use to hang upside down. And that hind foot has a locking mechanism, so that when they're in a tree or they're in a cave and they're hibernating, that foot has a lock so that they don't just fall right down to the floor. Then at the bottom you see the difference between a bat's wing and a bird's wing. That's really confusing me. And you can see the bat wing, like I said, finger. Can you still hear this? There you go. And then the bird's arm is much thicker bones. The fingers are shorter and fused, and the feathers are what compose the wing, not the skin. So I have a little something here that Ed and Patty were wondering what I was up to. A little something I'm going to pass around, and if you want, I know we've got sanitization issues, so make sure you don't touch your eyes. But this is a simple glove, and it's my simulated bat wing. Pretty much feels like a bat's wing, and it's that thin. So if you pass that around, you'll see what a bat's wing kind of feels like. So I've got the full anatomy here. We've got the fingers. We've got that foot, and you notice a little word at the bottom. It's called calcar. And some of the bat species have a little extra protrusion off the foot. It's kind of a thick, not a ligament, but it's a little thick protrusion, and it helps us find species from each other. Some of the bats have a keeled calcar, a little thing that sticks out, and some don't. And it's one of the ways we are able to identify bat species. I personally am not sure what the purpose of the calcar is, but I know that it exists. This one? Okay. Maybe I just leave it here. All right. Is that a little better? Sorry. No worries. I'm just worried I will be too tall. All right. Can we get the slides back up? Thank you. So the other feature I wanted to make sure you can see is up on the head, you see his ears. And we'll talk a little bit about how bats communicate and how they travel around. But in the ear, I want you to notice that thing called a tragus. And the tragus is a little pointy, we have our earlobe here. Their traguses are bigger than ours, they stick up. And between the ear, the tragus, and the nose, and in some bats they have a nose leaf that comes off, this helps amplify sound. When they are flying through the forest and they're using sonar, they're sending it out, and I'll show you some more illustrations of this, and then it's coming back. So the tragus, the ears, the nose, all work together to kind of, work that sound and help them navigate through their forest or their environment. That's called a tragus. So bat appearances. Bats come in all shapes and sizes. They come in really, really tiny ones. The smallest is known as the bumblebee bat. Yeah, that's Kitty's hognose bat, and that bat lives in Thailand. If you can picture that white glove there as a person's hand, like my hand is right here, pointing, and the little bat hanging off of it is about 1 inch in body length. Yeah, and he weighs about 2 grams. If you can imagine a paperclip weighing 1 gram, that bat weighs 2 paperclips, little paperclips. And I've never seen that one, but I know I know some of my colleagues have worked with that one. It's very, very tender handling when you have a bumblebee bat in your hand. And the lower one is, they go all the way up to the largest ones. The largest bat being the giant golden crown flying fox, just about 6 feet wide in wingspan. And how many of you have seen, I think it's Indiana Jones' Temple of Doom, where Harrison's running around through the forest pointing up to the bats? Those are giant blood-sucking vampire bats. And I'm always saying, no, they're not. No, they're not. Those are flying foxes and they eat fruit. So stop scaring everybody. So yeah, those are the ones at the bottom there. And that bat is the picture of the plant, and there's a fig tree. So they're fig-eating bats. Go ahead. Where do they live? That one right there, thank you, is from the Philippines. Yeah. I also had done some of my master's work, as Ed commented. I went to Antioch, New England Graduate School for my master's, and my advisor at that school was an ornithologist, bird specialist. I told him I wanted to do bats. He said, I don't know anything about bats. I said, I don't want to study birds, and you're my advisor, and I'm going to come up with a bat project. So I went to Pakistan to do my master's work, and one of the 4 species I studied for fruit-eating bats was the relative of this one, the giant flying fox, just about a 6-foot wingspan, 1 pound body weight. And then they come in all different colors. Some have stripes. You see that Antrosis pallidus, the one at the top, has stripes on his face. Some have spots, the little spotted bat off to your right. That one exists down in the southwestern United States. I've done some work out in Arizona in the Chiricahua Mountains and elsewhere, and the spotted bat lives in that area. And I was very disappointed when we went and did one of the latest studies, and I said, can we go up there to the top of the mountain to get to the spotteds? And they're like, no, we're going to stay down. I was Dara rat. And then they come in all different colors. Red, that's a red bat, which is native to the eastern United States. I forget the one, the crested bat. I forgot the name of it. And then we have, I often can only remember the Latin names and not the common names. We have the yellow-winged bat as well. And then the white one is from Panama. I believe it's, they are colonial and they rest in palm fronds. They take their little teeth and they bite the palm frond end at where you have the center of a palm frond. They'll bite each vein of the palm frond and it will droop and create a little tent. Yeah. A few bat basics. We've got the tree dwellers. So let me back up. We've got bats that roost in different places. We've got some that roost in trees. Those are tree dwellers. And in the U.S., the tree dwellers do migrate south because they don't hibernate in caves or winter hibernacula. They migrate. So they go all the way from north. Some of them go all the way to Central and South America to each year, back and forth. If you remember, I told you they're long-lived. They make the same trek that some of the birds and some of the butterflies make every year and all the way back. And so the maternity colonies with the females, they will use the same roost year after year if it's still there. It's amazing how they travel. And then we've got our cave and cliff dwellers, for example, the little small-footed bats. Then we have structure dwellers. I just did some work up in Pennsylvania, and we put radio trackers on some female bats. Every one of them ended up in houses because that's where the little browns had their maternity colonies. They prefer houses, your attics, your barns. Whereas some of the others will go to an old tree with a cavity in it. So every time you see an old tree, a lot of people want, I got to get that old tree out of my yard or we'll cut them all out of the forest because they're useless. We want to grow good wood. Those are the ones that have the bats in them. Those are the ones that are beneficial for habitat. And then, thank you. And then I have males versus females. So the males, and this is kind of a general statement, a lot of species, the males will hang out in singular by themselves or small roosts of a few males, whereas the females will cluster together in maternity colonies with the young, with the pups. That's not always true. We do have colonial species that will they'll all roost together. I'm thinking the fruit bats that I studied, there will be a huge tree and you just see lots of them, and male and female mixed. The life cycle and stages, this is kind of a generic little picture here, and I realize some of those bats are not, they're upside down. But for those northeastern or easterly species that do hibernate or do migrate, the males and females will mate in the late fall. The females will go into hibernation, and then the pups will be born in the spring. And again, that's not true for every species, but in theory, the pups are born in the spring, and then it takes them a little while for the mother to nurse them. The mothers leave them in the same space, whether it's in a tree roost or your house or a tree itself. So the red bats are tree dwellers. They hide in the leaves, just out in the leaves, and I have a picture of that. They will take care of the babies until they're old enough to fly, and then they will all roost together, all the babies, and the babies can now go out and feed themselves, fend for themselves. And at about 1 year old, they're on their own. They don't rely on mom again the next year. Hello, what happened here? I'm sorry, I don't know. Oh, don't touch that button again. So going back to that big world map, I now have the map of the U.S. You can see kind of a zoomed in view of the U.S., a hotspot area up in the Northeast. In New England, we have 8 or 9 species, including what Ed mentioned, the Indiana bats, which are federally endangered. And now we have the northern long-eared bats are now recently classed as federally endangered. And we have the little browns, which used to be the most prevalent, are up for listing with the Federal Fish and Wildlife Service as a listed species as well, because of what he mentioned. It's a white fungus that gets on the bats' noses, and in their hibernacula, they will wake up. They will use valuable fat stores when they should be sleeping, hibernating, and they will not make it through to the spring. So they'll die off. And when they're in a roosting situation, a colonial roost or maternity roost, they can pass this to each other. So that's why the tree-dwelling bats don't tend to get white nose syndrome as much as the colonial roosters. And then you see down in the desert southwest, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, that hot spot there, the red, 26, 30 species down there. In my career, I've handled over 20 species of bats. I think I've handled 12 of the species down, and I'm looking at them, the same map you see up here, I'm looking at out back here. So they have a lot of different bats out west versus our fewer bats over here, and I'll show you some from North Carolina in a moment. There we go, bats of North Carolina. So I hope that I can get these things to link. I do recently belong to the North Carolina Bat Working Group, and this is a great group that's here in your state, in North Carolina, and they do a lot of great work for bats. We have some great bat biologists. One colleague of mine formerly worked for North Carolina DOT, so a lot of bat biologists work for highway projects. Every federal project or state project that has federal dollars or permits, or municipal project that has federal dollars or permits, requires review by federal and state agencies for endangered species, including the listed species of bats. So I just linked this to our website here. Oops, sorry, I'm gonna go back. Let's see if I can get you here. This is the website you can check out when you get home. So big brown bats. I have one. I have a sample up here on the table later on when you're perusing the books and so forth. You can see a big brown bat. Here I have it stuffed. It's not alive. That bat is about the height of my hand sideways. And then when you spread his wings out, he's about, yeah, they're one of the larger bats in the Northeast. I still don't think they're all that large. And then we've got the tricolored bat, which used to be called pipistrelle, and I still call it a pip. I just always called them pips. Oops, and I did it again. Sorry. I gotta stay on that website. There it is. This one is now up for listing with the federal U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I recently caught one. They have a little pink forearm, and they're very little. They're very docile compared to the big brown bats. So when you see a pipistrelle in your hand, you'll know they're much smaller. Eastern red bat, beautiful, gorgeous bat. A rufous colored head, often a reddish color across the bigger part of it. And then the eastern red bat, I'll show you the hoary bat, and I will show you silver-haired bats. They all have furred tails. Because they're tree-dwelling species, they still are outside exposed to the cold and the environment, so they got to keep themselves warm. They're not roosting with dozens or hundreds of other bats, and so their mechanism is to have furry bodies, a lot furrier than their counterparts. Small-footed bat, one of our smallest bats. Myotis lebii. We've got the evening bat. Beautiful little dark-faced bat. The gray Myotis. That one is also listed in various. This is a lot of people's favorite, including my favorite. There's a picture of me here on the table holding a hoary bat that I caught. But this bat, when you get the hoary bat into a net, you know right away. Sounds like your radio static just went haywire. And I always get excited when I hear that because I will jump. I went into the middle of a pond one time to get that one that's in the picture, up to my top of my waders. I couldn't wait for the guys they had those paddle boats and they were trying to learn how to steer them in the pond. I couldn't wait for them. I'm like, guys, we're going to lose it. We're going to lose it. And Indiana Myotis, this is federally listed as well, endangered species. Indiana bats, one of the ways we know them from the little brown bats. If you remember back to that slide, I showed you the keeled cowcar. That's one of the features on the bats that we can differentiate this species from some of the others. And it's little brown bat. They look very similar, similarly sized. Very difficult to tell apart. Mexican freetail. The one in this picture is probably a young Mexican freetail because they're not as big as a big brown bat. But one of the neat things about a Mexican freetail, and I do have one in a case here, the tail does not have the membrane around it. If you remember that tail membrane called a uropatagium was encasing the tail down to almost the bottom of the tail length. Mexican freetail bats have a open tail. These are very fast flying bats. Their wings are thin and longer, so they're very agile and they can fly very fast. I know in the desert Southwest they have cow tanks where they give water to the cattle. And the bats are so fast that they can't always get up out of the end of the tank before they hit the end of the tank. And sometimes if the water's low in the tank and they go down in to drink, they'll hit it and they'll die in the tank because they can't get up and out fast enough. It's no different than when you're flying different sizes of aircraft, small little Cessnas versus a big jet. Some of them need more space to take off and land. Same with the bats. It's all similar flight characteristics. Northern long-eared, this is now a federally endangered species. You'll see a lot of these are showing their teeth. It's not because they're trying to bite the hand that's holding them, but because they're using echolocation. So their mouths are open and they're sending out sonar going, what is going on? I can't see a thing. You've got this light in my eyes, so I'm going to open up my mouth and try to figure out what's going on. We got the northern yellow bat. This is also a tree-dwelling species with a furry tail, similar to your red bat and your hoary bat. Rafinesque's big-eared. And if you notice the veins in his ears, that is a thermal regulation mechanism. So these ears are really tall, but when he's cold or when you're holding him in your hand and they're scared and don't know what, they will put the ear right down, they'll fold it up. So if you're a bat, and especially the bats out in the desert, they have these veins in their ears or these folds. So they'll use that as a thermal regulator. It's too hot, up they go, just like rabbits, they're letting the heat off. It's cold at night, they'll tuck them right back down, conserve heat. So it's also useful for their insect feeders, listening for the insects, and constantly, where's the insects? Seminole bat, another very well-furred bat. That's not a very great picture, so make sure you look up the Seminole bat when you get home. Silver-haired bats, no picture, but this one is also a kind of a very well-furred bat, gorgeous little bat. Southeastern myotis, another small myotis. The myotis species are very difficult to tell apart. So one thing I brought with me as a prop, you're welcome to look at, are some little ID cards where you start to look at very minor differences between, does it have toe hairs? Does it have a tragus that folds over its nose? You know, you have all these little measurements, you can tell which bat you're looking at. And because it's really important, if you're looking at an endangered species or something that's more common, the regulations change immensely on these projects that we work on. And then we have the Virginia big-eared bat. Again, very large ears, can fold it up. A colonial rooster, as you can see there. Some of your bats, if you imagine a wetland situation, or you have a lot of riverside areas where you've got the holes are in the bottoms of the trees, and some of these species will use those types of cavities, some won't. Some will use cavities up higher in the trees. You got to think about all their predators, the snakes, the raccoons, the possums, everything that's going to try and share that hole in that tree or that space. What's going to eat me? All right. Alrighty, that's bats of North Carolina. And then we talked about bat habitat a little bit. The roosts are where they live day to day in the non-winter time. For those bats that are in the colder climates, hibernacula are where they spend the winters because it is a constant temperature. And so they're in their caves, they will look for spaces where the temperature is constant and where they won't freeze to death. They don't want to wake up in the winter because there's no food outside that door. So that's why they usually wait until April to come out. When the insects, as soon as you see a big surge of insects, you'll see the bats out. A lot of people come to me in February, I haven't seen any bats. Are they all dying? No, they're hibernating. They need food. So forests, different kinds of forests, and we'll look at a couple of photos later. Bats utilize the forest differently. Like I mentioned, that Mexican free-tail bat, fast flyer, he doesn't do well in clutter, in trees that are really tight together. He's up over the tops where he can zoom by. He's out in open fields versus the little myotis species, very maneuverable. They can fly and get those, they can kind of not stop on a dime, but they can kind of turn faster than something with fast flying capabilities. Caves and cliffs. So this little bat here in the cliff, I want to say it might be a small-footed, but could be some other species. Big browns will use cliffs and caves. They're generalists, they'll roost wherever there's an opportunity, especially the males. And then houses and structures, we talked about the female maternity colonies. If you find a big group of bats in your attic or in your barn, it's probably a group of females, and there are probably some pups. And then, of course, you see this bat house here. This is a very well-established bat house. I get people all the time, I put a bat house up 5 years ago and there's nothing in it. So I did bring a bat house with me, and we could talk about that once we're done, how to site your bat house properly and make sure you get bats in it. But if you have tons of trees and you have cavities in your trees, they may not go to your bat house. They're happy. So if you don't get bats in your bat house, don't be disappointed that you did something wrong. Bat feeding and food. Frugivorous, fruit-eating bats. We talked about the fruit-eating bats a little bit. In the US, we don't have fruit-eating bats so much as in, say, the Philippines or Asia, some African bats, fruit-eating bats. Sanguinivorous, those are those vampire bats. There are 3 species of vampire bats that do feed on blood, from the very bottom of the southwestern US down through Latin America and into the Amazon. So I went to a bat conference in the edge of the Amazon one time, a few years back, we'll say, and it was focused on vampire bats. And I'm all excited, I'm going to learn about vampire bats, right? So I get down there and we're doing the conference and having the workshops, and it's break time. So I go over, every room has a nice veranda with a beautiful hammock. And I go to lay in the hammock and it's dusk. I'm going, wait a second. There's a lot of bats flying by me. It's a vampire bat conference. I'm going to go back in and sleep on the bed for a while. I wasn't quite sure. But the bats, the vampire bats, often you'll find they're feeding on agricultural animals, the cows, the pigs. However, they will feed on humans if the opportunity arises. So especially in poor places where they don't have screens on the windows, the bats will come in and utilize a human host. So in those areas, it can be a problem. I know my daughter went to Nicaragua when she was younger with a group, and the teacher was all excited to sleep under the stars. So I said, mind if I do a little bat program before you guys take off, like 15 minutes? Yeah, that'd be great. By the end of it, she changed her mind. She said, I'm staying at the Marriott. So I don't care. Make sure you got a mosquito net over my kid if you're sleeping out under the stars, okay? Nectivorous, those are nectar-feeding bats. We have 2 species or more in the U.S. Again, down in that hot spot, southwestern U.S., nectar feeders. They feed on the big saguaro cacti. All the different cactuses rely on bats for pollination and so forth. Piscivorous. We'll invite you. I have a National Geographic up here at the end that has at least one of the pictures here you see on the top right. That's I'm sorry, no, I didn't put the piscivorous one in here. I have a video I wanted to show you, but if I forget or we don't have enough time, go home, YouTube, fish eating bat. Watch it. It's fascinating. They've got huge shovel-like back feet. Just swoop over the water and catch minnows. And when you see it, you will see the most amazing thing about bats when they're feeding. I'll hold that thought for a minute, okay? Because I want to show you. And then frog-eating bats, that top right one there, frog-eating bat. I have that National Geographic here, has the frog-eating bat as well. They're listening for the frogs first. Beep, beep, your spring peepers or whatever gathers around. Beep, 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 beep. The bats are, whoa, what's that over there? And then they hone in on an area where they know the frogs are, and then they will use their sense of echolocation to get down there. And what the frogs will do, like the male frogs singing their hearts out, hey ladies, I'm over here, hey, beep, 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 over here. They're trying to find their mate, and then all of a sudden, to confuse the bats, they will all go silent at one time. And if you're a bat, you're listening, and all of a sudden silence, wait, did I hear myself right? So it confuses the bats only momentarily, but it's kind of like fish in the ocean when the shark comes in. Like you're together in a big pod or group so that a few of you might still make it out alive, right? So the frogs do this, and scorpions and centipedes. If you look at the top and bottom here, I've got a bat that's eating a scorpion, and the bottom is a centipede. Those are both pallid bats, one of my very favorite bats. They are the only species that will feed on scorpions that I'm aware of. So when you catch these bats, you'll see they might be missing an eye, they might have holes in their wings, they might be missing a toe, because those scorpions will fight back. And so they are trying to kill the bat as the bat's trying to eat them. It's pretty interesting. Bird-eating bats, bat-eating bats. If you look at the left there, that is a lizard in that bat's mouth. And then, of course, all the ones we're most familiar with on the East Coast, insectivorous bats. All of our species are insect-feeding bats. We talked a lot about feeding, roosting. That is a red bat up there in that tree on the right. And it's probably a mother with several of her pups. So red bats, most bats will have one baby, one pup per year. So this is why they don't it's very devastating if something like white nose syndrome comes along, because they don't reproduce like mice do. They're not having 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 litters a year. They're having one litter, one baby bat per mama. In the case of the red bats and some other species, they will often have 2. So they have 2 babies and up to 4. So if you can imagine you're a mother bat and you're a tree bat and you've got 4 babies, you're trying to take care of them all. You have to keep flying back and forth. And if something happens, that leaf on that tree falls off and now your baby's exposed, you've got to move them to a safer area. Or maybe you saw a snake coming up, you've got to keep carrying them to a new spot. If you've got 4 of them to take care of, it becomes difficult. But 1 or 2 are more likely the norm for the red bats. And again, that bottom right hand is a red bat. You see how well they blend in with those leaves. And then we've got colonial roosters there in a hibernacula. So they're hibernating. And it's very important to not go into a hibernacula, any caves you know of in the winter where there are bats. You wake them up and you may cost them their lives. So one thing that a lot of bat biologists do now, and I'll be going out to Pennsylvania to do this later this year, is to gate the caves. And it's kind of a double-edged sword because I love caving. I love going in and just being in a cave environment. And a lot of my caving colleagues do as well. But you're now endangering the bat's life. So we will put gates on there to keep general spelunkers, cave interest people, along with all of the people who want to shoot fireworks off and kill all the bats for fun, keep them out of the caves. So if you're into caving and you might want to visit caves, you'll need to contact your local grotto, cave organization, and they can maybe schedule you to come in. So in the non-winter months, it's possibly okay, as long as you're not damaging the cave environment. But in the winter months, yeah, it's kind of like keep out. We don't want to endanger the bats. And then you notice the one on the bottom right there. That's just an old tree falling apart, right? It's decaying, and that bark is falling off. But loose bark on a tree like that is critical habitat for multiple species, including this Indiana bat right here. So when you walk around a forest and you see bark sloughing off the trees, that could be a bat colony in there. And it doesn't take much space to house multiple bats. In some cases, dozens. We often will radio track Indiana bats to bark just such as this, along with the cavities. And then migrating, we talked about migrating species, the red bats being one of them, hoary bats, silver-haired bats, and the yellow bats, the tree bats. Bat flight patterns, talked about how they kind of compare to your airplanes. It's the same principles as any aviation. It's lift, it's thrust, it's friction, and it's weight. And they've got to overcome these 4 things to get around. Now that last, we've got the up, the scoop, the down, and the tuck. You remember what I said a little earlier? I'll come back to that. The tuck. That is where they have identified an insect that they're interested in, and they have to now catch the insect. And they do that by catching it in their tail, in most cases, flipping around in the air, sticking it in their mouth, or when you look at that fish-eating bat video that you're going to go home and watch, you'll see the bat scoops up the fish, shoves it in her mouth, does a little kind of a flip to get to the tree or wherever she's going to stop to eat the rest of the insect. Sometimes they'll eat it in midair. Small insect, what's next? They'll keep going. And so they're they're flipping in air and they're eating as they're going, and then they just keep going. So here's kind of what it looks like, and I wanted to share a little video of it. All right, okay, we'll do.
The king of flight isn't an insect or even a bird. It's the bat, the only mammal that can fly. Apart from us. Frankly, we're cheating. They can turn on a small coin and maneuver while flying so fast they're a blur. Slow motion reveals why bats have such amazing aerial agility.
See his leaf nose?
Unlike planes, bats' wings are never flat. They're constantly changing and adjusting their shape. Because these aren't really wings, they're hands. And like us, bats can flex and bend their fingers independently, giving them fingertip control in the air.
Amazing, huh? And this is a little mess. Sorry. I don't know what happened. Oh, YouTube's still going. Sorry about that. Let's get back to where we were here. Oh, sorry. All right, so I wanted to talk about echolocation. This is a busy slide. I apologize. I should have cleaned this up a little, but they're using sonar. They're using acoustics to navigate. Most bats can see just fine. Only 70% of the species use echolocation as a supplement. The fruit-eating bats, for example, don't need echolocation. They are semi-diurnal, operating in the daytime, but they can use smell to find their fruits. They love semi-rotting fruits, very ripe fruits. They know right where to go in the orchards. So I've had 70%. Other animals that use acoustics or echolocation: whales, dolphins, porpoises, some of the birds, and shrews. Most bat echolocation occurs between, humans, we're listening or we're making sound between 20 hertz to 15 to 20 kilohertz. Very low level sound. And I'll show you a demonstration of some tools that I brought this evening as we're going outside. Bat calls range from 9 kilohertz to 200 kilohertz, pretty much outside of our range. And female humans can hear at a higher frequency than most males. Not knocking anybody here. Just saying that if you're female, you might be able to hear a bat where a man can't or a boy can't. So when I'm out, for example, in Arizona, a lot of the females, we can hear the Mexican free-tail bats. They are a bat that transmits at a lower range of that frequency than some of the other species. Some of the bat sounds we can hear are just squawking and squeaking and other little things. They're in the roost. They're like, hey, move over. Just move. They're not echolocating. They're just like, they're just fighting or, communicating using low range sound like we do. But we can use a thing called a bat detector, and we can eavesdrop on them. So I brought 3 bat detectors tonight so that we can kind of walk outside, listen, see if we can hear anything. But I'll demonstrate how those tools work. And the way the echolocation works here, you can see I've got the sub at the bottom, sends out the sound. Sound echoes, hits the rocks in front of them or another sub, and it comes back, and then they can see in their radar screen, hey, there's another sub over there. And it's coming towards us. What are we going to do about it? Same with the dolphins, looking for fish, hunting around using sound, and the bats using sound. So they're echolocating to find their insects. They're echolocating to find a path to get home. They're echolocating to get through the trees to find their babies, using it for various purposes. And depending on what purpose they're using it for, they will use a faster or slower paced echolocation. So this is an example of a sonogram. So what happens, these tools that I brought, these bat detectors, you can hook them up to a software and they will read that sound and make it into a sonogram, similar to when you're listening to a baby in womb. that sonogram, it's listening to sound and making a picture. That's what the bats are doing. So I've got a little link here so you can hear a sample. So about midway in that sound, that little echolocation, you heard that little brrrt. So that was a bat looking for food, looking for food. Hey, there's something over here. And then all of a sudden, brrrt. And that's when he sees right where the moth is. He picks it off. He ate it. There was silence for a split second before he started looking again. Something small, mosquito, something small. If it was big and chewy and tasty, it would have taken him a few seconds. Or he'd go land in the tree. So they're flying around the edges of the trees, as you can see here. Got some infrared photography here. There's a bat or two bats flying around the edges of the trees. So top left, you can see he's kind of sending out that sonar beam. He's trying to find a target, looking for an insect. Gets close. Those echoes become closer together. He's found his moth. He's zeroing in. He's brrrt, and he's going to grab it and munch on it. And at the bottom, the very bottom, and there's kind of a schematic, and it shows the pulse going out. Pulse, echo. Pulse, didn't see anything yet. Echo, pulse, echo, pulse. Hey, there's something over here. Pulse, echo, pulse, echo. Hey, there's a target. There's a moth. Brrrt, and then he's got it in his mouth. And then he goes on to the next one. So this is how they're flying around looking for food. So we'll go out and see if we can hear any bats tonight. Not promising anything. Rain's going to hold off, right? See if we can listen to them. But I did want to talk about, as Mike mentioned at the beginning of the program, part of the role of the organization is to, talk about how we conserve things and why we conserve things. Who wants bats around? They're horrible. They might carry some disease. Mostly bats don't carry diseases. And if they do, it's in a much smaller, insignificant amount than a lot of other animals that we're familiar with. Yes, they are mammals. Yes, they can carry rabies. So can our family dogs. So can our other mammals when we're walking around in nature. But as long as you're not trying to handle a bat, you're not going to be exposed. If they are in your house, your barn, and you need to get them removed, call a professional. If they're in your house and they've been there a long time and there's a pile of guano or something, that can be a health hazard. You need to get them out of there. There's maybe histoplasmosis, some other fungal issues that you're dealing with. It's not safe to have them in your living environment. But they do have many benefits. So they do pollinate a lot of the plants that we're familiar with and that we rely upon. Some people, if you happen to be a tequila drinker, you can thank a bat, because those nectar feeders I mentioned earlier, they're not solely responsible for pollinating agave cactus, which is the source of tequila, but they are the primary pollinator of those plants. And I'll show you, fruits, they do not only disperse the seeds of fruits that we enjoy, they also germinate some seed species that rely upon a seed passing through the gut of an animal before they eject it out, and then it can grow. Some seeds won't grow until they've gone through an animal's gut. So we love mangoes and guavas, etc. Those are primarily bat dispersed fruits. And many, many more. There are species of bananas. There are tons of others. Durians. If anybody's ever smelled a durian, you won't find it pleasant, but the bats know right where to go for food. Insect control, of course. Tons of agricultural pests yearly. Billions of dollars of agricultural pests yearly are controlled by bats. And we forget about that. So you remember that Mexican free-tail bat that I told you about? If you ever get a chance to go to Austin, Texas, there are 1 million Mexican free-tails living under the Congress Street Bridge. Every night those bats come out, and years ago the city wanted to eradicate them. And I call him the father of bats, but not everybody does. So I've got some books up here about Merlin Tuttle, and he convinced the city to keep the bat bridge, and they realized it could become a tourist attraction, and it is now the #1 tourist attraction in Austin, Texas. They've got boats that come along every night with bat covers on them, and people pay, money to come out and ride in the boats, and people line the bridge every night, and fewer come under the bridge in the morning to watch the bats come out and then come back home. So I got a chance to do that last August, and it was amazing. 1 million bats coming out, and they don't just come up into the air and just start loosely flying around the city. They take off full force in one direction. Where they're going? The fields where those corn earworm moths and everything else are feeding. They're taking off for the fields. And at about 25,000 feet or so, that's where the moths are hanging out at night. That's where the bats are. So we got to thank them for that. We also, everybody talks about bats eating mosquitoes. And that, while that may be true, remember, if you've got a little hot dog in front of you, or if you've got a big juicy steak, which one would you prefer, the mosquito or the moth? They like the moths, but if there's a mosquito around, they might pick it off too. So they do account for a lot of mosquito control. And then other benefits that we don't even think about or thank them for. But I did want to point out that, so we've got a cockroach-eating, nectar-feeding bat. There's a fruit-eating bat from, that is a Wahlberg zeppeletid fruit bat right there. Can't really see the species that's eating the katydid. And then we have one of the two nectar feeders from our desert southwest. That's either Chironectarius or Leptonectarius. I can't see his Europatagium at his tail level. One of them has what we call pants, so it looks like he's wearing pants, and one has what we call skirt because the tail membrane goes around. So it's one of the two nectar feeders, and if you can see how well his head and his tongue fits right into that agave, or I forget, saguaro cacti flower, we call that a lock and key mechanism. It is a perfect fit that has evolved together over time. So you might get some little bugs that come along and accidentally pollinate that because the stamens, you remember, are way out. Not every bugs are going to crawl in and get a little nectar and crawl back out. A chipmunk might come along and get a little bit on it, but that's a long crawl up for a chipmunk. It's the bats that are the primary pollinators for these cacti. And an agave cacti only flowers once every 25 years or so. So if you're an agave cacti and you're shooting up your one flower after 25 years, you want it to get up there where the bats are to make sure that you haven't wasted your time and energy. So they've evolved together. And so what we'll do is we'll go out and see if we can find some around here. Different bats, like I said, will fly in slightly different environments depending on where they are. Some will fly at the tops of the trees, the edges of the forest, over a field. A lot of them, you think about what's critical to a bat, don't forget water. So in a lot of the bats, if you're trying to find them, in my case as a scientist trying to catch them, you're looking for water sources, and then you can often find bats over those. And then we have, some are the little myotis going through the trees. We will look for, and when Ed was with the Forest Service, we would put them over forest roads. In the forest, you got logging roads, because the bats are like us. The bats are like the deer. They're kind of lazy sometimes. If they got a straight shot where they can just hunt, they will fly up and down that path over and over. So if they have to go in amongst the trees, they'll do it, but some of them don't want to. But as far as conserving the bats, keeping them around your house, I know one gentleman here mentioned the bat boxes. That is one way to maybe attract them. Remember, if you have a lot of trees around, or you have a lot of old trees with cavities, your bat box might not be successful, and so don't feel bad. But it's a nice thing to use also as a conversation piece to get that the discussion started with other friends of yours who might be like-minded. Bat gardens, you think insects. If you have a garden that you want to plant and you're trying to get the pollinators, think about the kinds. I'm not much of a flower person, so I'm saying just find flowers that the bugs like, that the bats like. So if you can follow that train of thought, yeah. And then avoid chemical usage. If you have gardens or you're growing stuff, try to avoid chemical use. Use integrated pest management, natural types of insect control, diatomaceous earth, neems, all those natural types. Because what happens is over time, the chemicals get in the bats and other animals' systems, and it's called biomagnification. So the chemicals get in there, they're causing cancers and other issues just like they are for us. Yeah, and the bats won't live as long individually. Lighting. One of the ladies that I was walking in with said something about lighting, and she has bats around her place because they like the lights. You'll know that in recent years, a lot of lights have changed. Street lights, they're downward facing, the low light, non-light pollution lights. Anti-bug lights. Well, if you're a bat, an anti-bug light isn't really helpful. So bats, the insects like the lights. A lot of bats will actually fly around the lights. You remember back to when I would watch that engineering steeple? The spotlights on there were attracting those big Luna moths, and the bats were berserk around those lights. So, lighting is a mixed issue. As part of my master's program, I also studied some light pollution topics. But I just think carefully about lighting around your house, and if you want bats or don't want bats in certain areas. And never handle a bat if they're on the ground especially. They may be ill, but even if you see a bat that's on the side of a tree, don't just go up and grab it. If you see one in your house, don't just go up and grab it. They can carry rabies, very likely not, but you don't want to take that chance. If it's on the ground, it may be ill. Call the Fish and Game or call a wildlife rehab. There are lists for North Carolina and so forth. And then if you just want to become a part of the community a little more, every year we celebrate Bat Week, last week in October. And I think there's also International Bat Day and some other celebrations. And one of the reasons I like doing bat programs not in October is because everybody associates bats with scary, with, gruesome. And I say, no, they're not. So I'm not going to do it in October. I want to do it when the pups are out. So right now, if you imagine, the maternity colonies are active. They started in May. The moms are frantically trying to feed their pups right now through the end of July. So if you do have bats in your house or a structure, we ask that you leave them there until after the pups can fly. You do not want a lot of dead bats in your structure. The pups will die without sustenance. So wait until fall, have a professional come in, and it's done by a bat exclusion. They will caulk up any holes or help you determine where the bats are coming in, how to keep them from coming in next year. Like I said, those moms will come back to the same spot year after year. And then additional resources. I mentioned Merlin Tuttle. He has his own organization, merlintuttle.org. Bat Conservation International, which is an organization that Merlin founded over 20 years ago. And they are the ones who kind of manage that Bat Bridge out in Austin. That's where they're located. But if you go to their website, they have just tons of information. Merlin's website has amazing photography, just stunning. He's one of the most well-known nature photographers in the world because of his bat photos. North Carolina Bat, that says Bat Working Group, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Luby Bat Conservancy is in Florida. They conserve our fruit-eating bats and a lot of the bats from overseas and help rehab them. And they are kind of a small zoo. If you ever get a chance to go down to Gainesville, Florida, they are open to the public. And then general info, of course, Wikipedia and other sites. And YouTube, plenty of videos. So I think if I could share one favorite video. Do I have an extra minute? Do you need to end? Okay. If I can get to my internet here. All right. My favorite video of all time. I tried to make a link on here. I'm so sorry for not having it. Goth bats dancing. They filmed this upside down. Oh, sorry. We don't care. Are we all hungry? That's too funny. So, if you notice, those bats were filmed right side up, from our perspective, upside down for them. And so, if you did notice that one towards the end, he kind of did this flip thing. Bats do not like to have their roost dirty any more than we do. So when they do their business, they do hang upside down, and they urinate to the ground. So that's what he was doing. So with that, I'd love to entertain any questions.
Yeah, if you have a question, please wait for the microphone. Okay. Questions? Okay, start.
You want to hold it?
Yeah, sure.
It'd be better if I hold it.
too.
Thank you.
He's fond of his
Okay, so
microphone.
I live downtown and we have lots of bats, and bats go from one house to another. One neighbor has them eradicated or, shut out, and it moves to the next house and just keeps going up and down the streets. So my issue is when I walk into my house and there are bats flying around my living room.
Yep.
What is the best thing for me to do? Because they will bounce off the ceiling, bounce off the floor, and I'm like, I get a towel and try to be some kind of to get them, but I don't want to hurt them.
So
But they're also terrifying me.
Yeah,
So what
yeah,
do
I
I
get it.
do?
So there's two things. One is how are you, like they're already in there, and what do you got to do to get them out of there immediately? Even if a lot of people will turn on the lights and then try to catch them with a net or a tennis racket or whatever. If you turn off the lights and open a door or a window, a lot of times they will fly out on their own. That doesn't always work. But as far as eradicating them permanently from your space, you have to figure out where they're coming in. So at dusk, if you can stand at the edge of your house when they're starting to emerge for the night, they're coming out to feed. Wherever they went in, they'll come back out. You figure out where that space is. A lot of times it's in the eaves. And these are little bats. The myotis in particular can fit into something the size of a quarter. So if you have a little hole around the top, you need to get that plugged up. But like I was saying earlier, at this time of year isn't a good time, because if that's a maternity colony in your house, you're going to have a lot of dead baby bats in there stinking up the place. So if you can hold off until beginning of August, plug up all the holes this year, then hopefully you won't have that problem next year.
So it's best to turn the lights off and open the door.
Open the door. I don't know how big your room is, so
And they're just roaming between the kitchen and the dining room
Yeah.
and the living room.
I'll put a sheet or something up to keep them confined, could get them to one section of the space where the door is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. I thought I saw bands on some of the legs
Yeah.
in the pictures. Do you band bats?
Yeah, and a lot of the scientific studies, we will put a band on the bats for different purposes. Not every bat gets banded every time, because those bands are, there's a cost to that as well. So a lot of times the research will focus on the females and following the females around to see where the roosts are and where the maternity colonies are. But some of the bands are how we've been able to determine how old the bats live. So you get these 25, 28-year-old bats, because we can see the band. And now the catalogs, the data, where we store the data, are getting more sophisticated and more scientists working together. So we have Bat AMP, which is nationwide. We've got another bat program that's nationwide. But yeah.
One other question, how high do they fly?
The migrating bats are, I don't know how many, well, the Mexican freetails will hunt on a daily basis at 25,000 feet. So, I mean, that's one study. I don't know that it's always that, but, so they do go pretty high up, especially when they're migrating. Yeah.
Please wait for the microphone so people can hear.
Can bats defend themselves against snakes and raccoons and
Oh,
things
yeah.
like that?
They
What
got,
do they do?
you saw those teeth, right? I've handled some of those bats. I put them back sometimes because, so yeah, they can defend themselves. I didn't show, but if you go home and YouTube fish eating bat, and you look at that video, at the end you will see a catfish going after a bat and a bat being able to get away from a catfish. But yeah, they can defend themselves using those teeth. And I don't know, as far as which snake you're talking about, but they do have the teeth as their primary defense mechanism. Yeah. Yep.
And two things. You said 25,000 feet?
That was one study that I was familiar with. If you Google weather balloon bat study, Gary McCracken,
They're Chinese bats.
they're trying to eat
With a balloon.
the moths.
No, it was kind of a joke.
Oh, they were trying to catch the weather balloon, yeah.
The second one, I just put 2 bat boxes up,
Yes.
and I got some of that spray attractant. Does that work, or what's another way to attract them to your bat boxes?
I'm not familiar with spray attractants, so.
I think I got it from Bat Conservation, actually.
Oh, from
Just a little spray
BCI.
bottle that they say spray that on the landing board.
I gotta look this up. I am not familiar.
Do you know of any other ways to attract bats to a bat box?
Just,
Yeah, I put a sign up too.
you did? You put the
Yeah.
sign up, the little arrow said vacancy? So you gotta make sure it's built right. So this one that I'm holding has multiple bays.
Got the boxes from Bat
Yeah.
Conservation also.
Okay, good. And not, yeah, if you got it from BCI, great. But even some of the bat houses I've seen for sale from other, I don't want to name any organizations because I don't want to make them look bad, but I've seen bat boxes from nature organizations that are not going to get bats in them. So a lot of times it's more of a decoration or a, but yeah, if it's from BCI, Bat Conservation International, they've got manuals and so forth as well. But I don't personally know how to attract the bats other than making sure it's 12 to 15 feet high, south facing. It's in a place where there aren't already a lot of trees. But if you have bats in your house, for example, and you put a bat house on the outside of either attached to your house or a nearby tree, you exclude them from your house. The idea is they'll move into the bat box. So
I put my picture up on one too.
that might be scaring them. I'm sorry. If you're going to dish it out, you got to take it back, right?
Can you just play the video of the fish eating bats since we're already here?
I just want to make sure we have time to go out. That's a good idea.
Thank you.
If anybody's in a rush, I apologize. Okay, fish eating bat. Because it's only just now getting to be dusk. Not deadliest.
Other questions while we wait?
This is the home of one of the most remarkable animal athletes on the planet. This is a fishing bat. Here in a forest in southern Belize, she's coming out of her home in this cedar tree to pinpoint the sound of her prey. Here's what she's after. Fish feeding at the surface of the water. The mother bat readies to swoop down and capture a meal. She has to fuel up so she can make milk for her hungry baby called a pup. Now, with the speed, timing, and artistry of an all-star football league receiver, she skims. She scores!
She flips.
Whoa, let's see that again. Truth be told, this mother bat is even more artful than an NFL tight end because she's using perfect timing to grab a prize that doesn't want to be grabbed. A mother bat will sometimes catch and eat 30 fish in one night. Lest you think that's unfair for fish, well, think again. Sometimes prey bites back. Even as these bats flutter around in search of their next meal, these catfish eyeball the bats, waiting for one to slip up. The bats swoop down to refresh themselves, only vaguely aware of the catfish. I mean, what's to worry about? The bats are quick, agile, and airworthy. The catfish are slow, sluggish, and sea-bound. Then, one bat dives with too much enthusiasm. It becomes waterlogged and can't achieve liftoff. Now, the catfish have a chance. The bat thrashes in frustration. The catfish stir. The more the bat roils the waters, the more it excites the fish. The catfish move in for the capture. The bat tries to scramble up a rock, but it's too slippery. The slow, deliberate catfish grabs the quick, agile bat in its jaws. But the spike of fear powers the bat out of its reach at the last possible second. The soggy bat flies off and hangs itself to dry, pondering a near-death experience.
Oh, anyway. So what I wanted to do here, I would like to invite you to come outside. We may or may not be able to detect bats, but I do have 3 bat detectors that I brought with me this evening. So this is a very simple bat detector. It only tells us absence or presence. It tells you if there's a bat around. It doesn't tell you what kind of bat. Remember, everything makes noise. We make noise at very low level frequencies. The bats are very high. But everything makes a noise, right? So everything makes a noise. So this thing just detects a noise that may be a bat or maybe something else. You can hear feeding buzzes with that one. And then I have one here that will detect bats kind of at a close range. This is something you yourselves can purchase and listen in your own backyard. It's called a baton. This one I think was 130. So you see that fan right here? Even the fan is making noise. So you have to know where you are and what you're trying to listen to. This is nice to just go out and listen for bats in your own backyard. Then we get more sophisticated, and you can actually dial in the hertz on the machine. And for this one here, you can kind of figure out which group of bats you want to listen for, and you can dial it to the exact hertz. And then when you turn it on, I think we did a little. So this one, my fingers are clicking at about 10 kilohertz. But up here at 100 kilohertz, you don't hear my fingers anymore because that sound is transmitting between 20 and 40 kilohertz. So when you get up into the bat ranges, you'll kind of know it's a bat versus a fan. And then they become even more sophisticated up into the thousands of dollars where you can add that software and it'll tell you which species you're watching. So we can take these out.
You need to speak into this microphone because else the people
Oh, thank you so much.
hear you.
So the people on Zoom, we were going over our bat detectors. We're going to take these outside and we're going to try and see if we can hear bats. And what I do is I attach or I hold the detector right next to a flashlight or a spotlight, in this case a 6,000 lumen spotlight. And when we hear the bat and you shine that on them, you can follow them around and you can watch them doing their business, whether it's feeding or it's trying to get away from your light, whatever. I also often have a headlight. That's a good thing to use when you're out and about looking for bats and you need both your hands free. And then I also brought, I think I mentioned to you, when you get out of your chairs, you can come up and see. I brought a skeleton of a Mexican free-tail bat. So you'll see that this is an old skeleton, so it is kind of falling apart. But you can see that his tail is free from any tail membrane. And then this one here on the corner, and I'd ask that you don't touch the box just because the top's coming off. This is a big brown bat, native to our eastern coast. This is an insectivorous bat, and you will see his wings are kind of wide and thin. So he's a fast-flying bat versus the myotis with a wide wing and a short wing that go in amongst the trees, and they don't mind clutter. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's been great. Before we go outside, I have some CNC business.
Is mic working? That's better. I like that. Okay. Our next program is not a program. Next month, we are going on an excursion to the estuarium. And you know where that is? That's in Little Washington. And we have could have 15 people. And there will be a boat ride for 10 people. So, and anybody interested, also after that, we are going to visit the Underground Railroad Museum in Little Washington. It's the Waterfront Underground Railroad Museum. In between, we'll have lunch. So if you're interested, please sign up because the spaces will go quickly. There's 2 people signed up already. That's me and my wife. So if you're interested, sign up, and there will be a waiting list also.
What's the date?
The date is July 22nd, Saturday, July 22nd. All right. Oh, yeah. The only fee involved is the estuarium. They're $5. It's very expensive. $5. And other than that, the boat ride is free. The lunch, you have to pay for yourself. Okay. Are we ready to have people come up here? All right. So thank you all on Zoom. Unless you want to show some stuff. But the people here can peruse the material up here. I got to remind you again, if you like what we're doing, please donate either here or online at carolinanaturecoalition.org. Thank you all.